An 8-year-old girl walked into a skyscraper alone, soaked from the rain, clutching nothing but a crayon resume and the quiet hope that someone might finally see her. She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg. She asked for something far harder: to be witnessed. What happened next would unravel the life of a powerful CEO, reshape the future of a forgotten child, and spark a legacy built not on perfection, but on presence. This isn't a story about rescue. It's about what happens when someone dares to show up. It was raining when she walked in. Not the kind of storm that stops traffic or sends people ducking into doorways, but the slow, steady kind that makes the city look washed out, like someone turned the saturation down on the world. The lobby of the Langley Tower gleamed despite the gray outside: polished marble floors, brushed steel columns, an atrium so high it made your neck ache just looking up. She didn't seem to notice any of it. She was 8 years old. Her jacket was too thin. Her socks didn't match. Her ponytail leaned slightly to the left, like it had been tied in a hurry. But she walked through the revolving doors like she belonged there. No hesitation, no fear, just a sense of purpose most adults couldn't fake. The security guard blinked as she approached the front desk. "I'm here for Mr. Westin," she said. The man behind the counter squinted. "Do you have an appointment, sweetheart?" She opened her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, heavy construction stock, lined with bright pink crayon. "This is my resume." He took it, stunned. It had hearts in the margins and stars in the corners. Her name was written in bold block letters at the top: Ella Ray Moreau. Underneath, the bullet points read, "Good at stories, good at hugs, really good at trying, not afraid of tall people." She drew a unicorn on the back, the guard said later when retelling the story. The horn was a pencil. He didn't know what to do, so he called the executive assistant upstairs and told her, "There's a kid down here who says she's applying for a meeting." 10 minutes later, she was in the elevator. 42 floors up in an office lined with city views and silence, Jason Westin stood staring out the window. He was, depending on which publication you believed, either a genius or a monster. At 39, he had built one of the fastest-growing philanthropic tech firms in the country. But he hadn't done it for kindness. He did it because he knew how to see what others didn't. He could spot patterns in chaos, gaps in markets, and people who would never ask for help but desperately needed it. What he couldn't see, what he didn't know how to process, was the little girl now being led into his office by his wide-eyed assistant. "She wouldn't leave," the assistant said, breathless. Jason turned. Ella looked up at him and smiled. "Hi, I want to work here." He blinked. "Excuse me?" She held out the resume. "I made this." He took it automatically, read it twice. "You want to work here?" "I want to be useful," she said, "and I figured if you build stuff that helps people, maybe I could help too. Just one afternoon a week. Or maybe two." He sat down, stunned, reading the resume again like it might make more sense the second time. Then he asked, cautiously, "Where's your mom or dad?" Her eyes shifted. "My mom passed. My dad's, not around." A beat passed. Jason looked at her, really looked, and something inside his chest, a place he hadn't felt in years, twitched. "And what is it exactly that you're applying for?" She pointed to the unicorn, Chief of Trying. That was when he smiled, a real one, small, unrehearsed. "And what's your request?" Ella looked at the floor, then back at him. "I don't want money," she said quietly. "I just want someone to see me try." Jason Westin, a man who had written checks for millions, funded hospitals, rebuilt water systems in 3 countries, felt tears prick the edges of his vision. Not because she begged, but because she didn't. Jason didn't cry, not then, not in front of her. He blinked a few times, just enough to steady the sting behind his eyes, then leaned back in his chair and set the resume gently on his desk like it was made of something precious. "Ella," he said slowly, I don't usually do interviews before lunch. She tilted her head. Is that a yes or a no? He gave a quiet chuckle. I don't know what it is yet. She stepped forward and stood in front of his desk, small hands folded like she'd practiced this moment. I can read and write, and I can sit quietly for long times if I have to. I see that. He tapped the paper. And this says you're good at hugs. She nodded solemnly. My teacher said it was one of my gifts, but I only give them when people need one. Jason didn't know what he was doing. Every part of his life had rules, systems, algorithms. There was no model that accounted for an 8-year-old child with a unicorn resume and eyes that saw through pretense like sunlight through glass. Where do you live, Ella? With Miss Shelley. She runs a foster house. It's not bad, but it's not permanent. The way she said permanent lodged itself in his ribs. And they let you come here on your own? I didn't tell them. That stopped him. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. She watched him for a moment. Are you mad? No, he said. I'm not mad. I'm surprised. I figured if I didn't try, nothing would happen. And if I did try, something might. He stared at her. This child, this impossibly brave, impossibly small person, had walked through a storm into a skyscraper and asked not for food or money or sympathy, but to be seen. Jason rose from his chair and walked around the desk, then crouched down so they were eye level. I'll make you a deal. Her eyes lit up. You can spend the afternoon here, just today, as my chief of trying. No pay, just curiosity. You can ask questions, take notes, and see what we do. But at the end of the day, you have to go home with one promise. She narrowed her eyes, skeptical. What promise? That if you ever feel unsafe again, you tell me. No more secret trips to skyscrapers, she considered. And I can come back? Let's take it one day at a time. Ella stuck out her hand. Jason shook it. Her grip was firm. He liked that. I'm going to need a notebook, she said. He stood already signaling his assistant. And a pencil sharpener. 2, she said. Unicorns break tips. For the next 4 hours, Jason Westin, a man who had built fortune out of foresight, sat in meeting rooms with Ella Ray Moreau beside him, scribbling in a pink spiral notebook. She asked why synergy was used so often and whether the word pivot meant they were dancing. She took notes on a whiteboard during a brainstorming session and made everyone write their names in bubble letters for clarity. By 3 p.m., she had rearranged the sticky notes on the conference wall by color, created a trying ideas column, and declared one executive under review for boring slides. Jason didn't stop her. He watched. Because somewhere between morning coffee and the end of that first meeting, the girl had done something he hadn't felt in years. She made him care, not about results, not about ROI, but about people. At 4:15, she yawned. By 4:30, she was asleep in a chair in his office, curled up with her unicorn backpack like it had always been hers. Jason stood there for a long time, arms crossed, watching the small rise and fall of her breath. He hadn't noticed how quiet the office had become, how still his own mind had gone. His assistant knocked gently on the door. What should I do with the resume? He looked down at the crayon paper still sitting on his desk. Frame it, he said softly. Put it next to the awards. The assistant blinked. You're serious? Jason nodded. It's the best one I've ever received. Ella didn't stir until the rain stopped. Outside the window, the city had shifted from gray to gold, those few twilight minutes where everything feels softer, quieter, as if the whole skyline has exhaled. She blinked herself awake, rubbed one eye, and looked around like she was trying to remember where she was. Jason was sitting at the far end of the office, tapping notes into a tablet, but watching her over the edge of the screen. She sat up straight and stretched. I fell asleep. You did. Was I snoring? Only a little. She smiled. My teacher says it means I'm growing. He stood and walked over to the desk, setting down the tablet. "Well, Chief of Trying, how was your first day?" Ella straightened like it was a real performance review. "I learned that most people say a lot of words to avoid saying the real thing. I learned that meetings take too long. And I learned that coffee smells better than it tastes." He laughed. "All very accurate." She grew quiet for a moment, tracing a finger over the edge of her notebook. "Do you think I was helpful?" Jason didn't answer right away. He leaned back against the desk and folded his arms. "You reminded me why I started this place," he said. "You reminded me that trying, honest, messy, unpolished trying, is more valuable than all the polish in the world." She beamed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key card. "This doesn't get you into anything important, but if you scan it at the front desk, they'll let you up." Her mouth opened slightly. "For real?" "Only if you promise to always bring crayons." She took the card gently, like it might break. "I'm going to keep it in my sock drawer. That's where I put the stuff I never want to lose." He crouched so they were eye level again. "Ella, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When you said you wanted someone to see you try, what did you mean?" Her eyes didn't flinch. "Most grown-ups look at kids and decide what we can't do. My mom, she believed in what I could do, even when I messed up." Jason nodded, listening closely. "When she got sick, everything changed. I wasn't the girl people remembered. I was the one people pitied or ignored. I don't want to be the kid they feel sorry for." "What do you want to be?" She thought for a long time. "I want to be the reason someone else tries. One day." He felt it again, that aching pull in his chest. The one that told him this wasn't random, that this wasn't a story about charity or surprise. It was a beginning. "Then you're already halfway there," he said. She nodded, then stood and slung her backpack over her shoulder. "Miss Shelley's probably worried. I should get back." "I'll call a car for you," he said. She hesitated. "Can I walk to the curb alone?" Jason blinked. "Why?" "Because I walked in by myself. I want to walk out the same way. So I remember I can." He smiled, stepped aside, and opened the door. She looked back once, halfway down the hall. "Do I still have the job?" she called. "Come back Thursday," he said. "Bring a better pen." She saluted, and then she was gone. Jason stood in his office for a long time after. The crayon resume was framed by morning. The next time she showed up, she was carrying a folder. Not a backpack, not loose sheets. A real folder, purple plastic with a snap button, worn at the edges but held together with pride. Jason had just wrapped a strategy session when his assistant appeared in the doorway. "She's here," she whispered, a smile tugging at the edge of her voice. Jason stood, almost too quickly. "Send her in." Ella entered with the same determined walk as the first time, but this time there was something different in her face, less nervous, more sure of her place in the room. "Morning, Mr. Westin," she said with mock formality. "Morning, Chief." She opened the folder and pulled out a new page, her weekly report. "It's color-coded," she said, laying it on his desk. "Green is what I liked, yellow is what I didn't understand, and red is what I think we should change." Jason stared at the page, then looked up at her. "You think we should change?" She nodded. "Your receptionist said we're a mission-driven organization, so I figured missions change things. Why not meetings?" He grinned, sitting back in his chair. "Let me see what's in red." She pointed. "Too many acronyms. If you're going to say ROI, at least once explain what it means. Not everyone's born knowing it." Jason jotted a note down. "Fair." "Also, you had a guest speaker. He talked about social impact like it was a product. That felt weird." Jason stopped writing. "You're right. I've been doing this so long I forgot how that might sound." She leaned forward slightly. "I think you started this because you care about people. You just talk like you care about numbers." He looked at her, genuinely impressed. "You're 10, right? Almost 11? Then I'm going to have to start paying attention." She smiled, then grew quiet. "What is it?" he asked. "I got moved again," she said. "Miss Shelley's house was too full. I'm with a new family now. They're nice, but he waited. They don't really see me, not like you do. Jason swallowed. I'm sorry, Ella. She shrugged. It's okay. It's just, the folder's all I could take with me. Everything else had to fit in one bag. He sat back, feeling something shift again. Subtle, slow, irreversible. How many times have you been moved? 4. His jaw clenched. That's not okay. I know, but if I get sad every time I stop trying, so I keep trying. The silence between them thickened. Finally, Jason said, Would you like to stay for the rest of the day? Her eyes lit up. Can I? You still have your badge, right? She nodded. Then Chief of Trying is officially back on duty. For the next 4 hours, Ella sat in his office as he made calls, reviewed grant proposals, and revised a new campaign. She sketched in the margins of her notebook, asked questions during breaks, and reminded him, gently, that empathy wasn't a buzzword. At 5:30, as the sun slanted through the west windows, Jason walked her to the lobby. You want to walk to the curb alone again? He asked. She looked up at him. Actually, this time, can you come with me? He nodded and walked beside her, neither of them speaking. When the car arrived, she opened the door, then paused. Mr. Westin? Yeah? Do you ever think about adopting? The question landed like a whisper in the middle of a storm. Jason didn't answer right away. I haven't, he said. But maybe it's time I do. She nodded once, then climbed into the car, folder on her lap. He watched the taillights disappear into the city haze, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was building something. He felt like he was becoming something. Jason didn't sleep much that night. Not because of worry or deadlines. He had outgrown that kind of pressure long ago. What kept him up was a question, small, quiet, persistent. Do you ever think about adopting? He sat in his apartment, lights dim, city humming softly through the windows. The framed awards on the wall, once his markers of success, now felt less like trophies and more like placeholders, things he had built to distract from what he hadn't dared to imagine, a life where someone needed him, not for his empire, not for his money, but for who he chose to become. He opened his laptop and typed, Adoption Process, NYC. The search results returned endless blue links, agencies, attorneys, timelines, testimonials. He clicked through a few, watched a video, read an article from a family law judge about why stability matters more than perfection. His hand hovered over the mouse when he reached the part about home visits, background checks, parenting classes. Could he do this? Not in the legal sense. He could hire lawyers and complete paperwork in his sleep, but in the human sense, could he be someone's constant? He closed the laptop at dawn and sat on the floor beside the couch, not because he was tired, but because he didn't want to move forward until he was sure. The next day he walked into the office with something different in his posture, not hesitation, not resolve, something in between, hope tethered to fear. He found his assistant before his first meeting. I need to speak with someone about guardianship, quietly, thoroughly, she blinked. Sir? I think I'm going to adopt someone. Her eyes softened, and her voice dropped. Ella? He nodded. She didn't ask why. She only said, I'll make a list. The process began slowly. Phone calls, consultations. A background report so detailed it made his company's due diligence reports look like coloring books. A home study that required answering questions he hadn't asked himself since childhood. Why do you want to adopt? Describe your parenting style. What does unconditional love mean to you? He answered honestly, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with long pauses, but never with lies. Meanwhile, Ella kept coming back. Every Thursday, same time, same notebook, same wide-eyed interest in things most adults overlooked. But she didn't ask again, didn't push. Until one afternoon, as she helped restack folders in the conference room, she said, Is this what it feels like to belong somewhere? Jason looked up from the papers he was reviewing. What do you mean? Just knowing you'll be in the same place next week. Knowing someone will remember your favorite color, or your laugh, or how you hate plastic spoons. He smiled faintly. You've been watching me. I always watch the people I want to understand. He stood and walked to where she was now lining the folders by color. I've been talking to some people, he said, to see what it would take to make this official. Her hands froze on the stack. He continued, It's not easy, it'll take time, and I can't promise I'll be perfect. She turned slowly. But you'd be there? Every day I could be, every day you need me. Ella didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded. You already are. Jason knelt and pulled something from his pocket. Not a gift, not a legal form, a tiny silver pin, a unicorn with a pencil for a horn. He'd had it custom made. I thought the chief of trying deserved a badge. She took it with shaking hands. And in that moment, Jason Westin, who had once been defined by towers and timelines, felt something shift in his soul. He wasn't rising. He was rooting. The home visit was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Jason spent the night before vacuuming corners he hadn't looked at in months. He stocked the fridge with snacks Ella liked, apple slices, string cheese, oatmeal raisin cookies. He even replaced the rug in the living room after realizing it looked more like corporate waiting area than place a kid might build a pillow fort. At 9:45 a.m., the doorbell rang. The caseworker's name was Mara. She was calm, warm-eyed, and carried a leather satchel filled with forms and files. This is a preliminary suitability visit, she said as she stepped inside. We're just here to talk, not judge. Jason nodded, offering coffee. She declined politely. They walked through the space, Jason giving a halting tour. Kitchen, office, living room, the spare room Ella had started calling hers, even though she hadn't moved in yet. Her notebook still sat on the nightstand, open to a page where she'd drawn a cartoon version of the office's whiteboard, complete with tiny sticky notes and labeled doodles of try now and try again later. She comes every Thursday, Jason said. It's the best part of my week. Mara smiled. That's good to hear. When they sat down, her question started gently. Why now? Jason didn't offer a rehearsed answer. Because I didn't know what was missing until she walked into my life, and now I can't imagine letting her leave it. Have you ever considered parenting before? Not seriously, he admitted. Not until her. Mara nodded and jotted notes. She's been through a lot, she said after a moment. Moves, uncertainty, gaps in care. She doesn't trust easily, but she's responded to you faster than most children in her file have responded to any adult in years. Jason's voice was quiet. She's taught me how to earn it. At the end of the visit, Mara stood at the door and said, There's more paperwork, of course, but emotionally, this looks promising. After she left, Jason sat down on the edge of Ella's bed, staring at her open sketchbook. On the next page, she had written 3 words in her tidy, blocky handwriting. Try, stay, grow. That night, when Ella arrived for her Thursday session, he told her about the visit. She sat on the edge of the couch, legs swinging. Was she nice? She was, he said. She said you've changed since you've started coming here. Ella picked at a string on her sleeve. I don't feel changed. I just feel seen. He leaned forward. That's how change starts. There was a long pause. Then she looked up. If I come here forever, will it stop being special? His heart tightened. No, he said. It'll just become something better. It'll become home. She didn't answer right away, but she reached for her notebook and began drawing. A doorway, a tall chair, a girl standing in front of it with her hand outstretched. He watched her quietly and realized she wasn't asking for permission anymore. She was making space. The letter came on a Friday. A simple white envelope in a stack of mail, unremarkable except for the letterhead of the Office of Child and Family Services. Jason opened it without ceremony, expecting another procedural update. Instead, the words stopped him cold. Application placed on hold pending background clarification and third-party custody petition filed by maternal relative. He read it twice, then a third time. Someone else was stepping forward, and he called Mara immediately. "I just got a letter. It says someone from Ella's family—" "Yes," Mara said gently. "Her aunt, on her mother's side. We received the petition late yesterday." Jason stood at the window, hand gripping the frame. "She's never mentioned an aunt. She's been in and out of the system herself, not stable, but technically still family. And by law, that means we have to investigate her claim." Jason was quiet for a long moment. "What does this mean for Ella?" "It means we pause your guardianship process until we assess the legitimacy of the aunt's claim. Can she take Ella?" "She can request visitation, and if a judge deems her environment suitable, she could file for custody." His voice was quiet. "And if it's not suitable?" "Then we resume where we left off." When he hung up, Jason felt something he hadn't felt since the company's early days: panic. Not over money or reputation, but over the idea of loss. Ella arrived later that afternoon, notebook in hand, braid slightly lopsided. He tried to keep his voice even as they reviewed the nonprofit's new youth program proposal, but she noticed. Of course she did. "You're doing that thing with your eyebrows," she said suddenly. "What thing?" "Where you scrunch them and stare like something's broken, but you don't want to say it out loud." He set the paper down. "Something came up." She waited. "Someone from your family has filed a petition to take guardianship of you, an aunt." Ella didn't react right away. Then she said, "Aunt Callie?" "I don't know her name." Her face changed, just slightly, but Jason saw it, a flinch, a memory. "She's not good," Ella said. "Not bad like movies. Just not safe. She drinks, a lot, and when she gets mad, she says scary things." Jason kept his voice steady. "You've stayed with her before?" "Twice. I don't talk about it." He nodded, heart aching. "We'll tell the court everything. They'll still think she counts more." "No," he said. No, they won't, not this time." Ella stared at the table. Jason knelt beside her chair. "You're not going anywhere you don't want to go." She blinked fast. "They always say that, but they still move you." "I'm not they," he said softly. "And I don't care how long it takes. I'll wait. I'll fight. I'll show up." Her voice cracked. "Even if it takes months?" "Even if it takes years." She threw her arms around him, tight, sudden, fierce. The kind of hug she'd written on her crayon resume years ago, the kind only given when absolutely needed. He held her back just as fiercely, because now he needed it too. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature, but in tone, the kind of sterile space that made even truth feel like it needed to wear a suit and speak in full sentences. The walls were pale, the chairs uncomfortable, and the judge was a woman with silver hair and unreadable eyes who'd likely heard every kind of story. Ella sat beside Jason at the long table reserved for petitioners, her legs too short for the seat, but her back straight as a ruler. She was holding her notebook like a shield. Across the aisle sat a woman in her early 40s, dark circles under her eyes, arms crossed too tightly, expression brittle. Aunt Callie. She didn't glance at Ella, didn't acknowledge her, just stared at the judge like this was a formality. Jason had met her only briefly, during the mandated visitation arranged by the court. It had lasted 10 minutes and ended with Ella refusing to speak. Now, a court-appointed representative stood and read the facts. Ella's history, the petition from Jason, the counter-petition from Callie, the recommendation from Mara. The judge listened silently, chin resting on her hand. Then it was time for Jason to speak. He stood steady, despite the storm in his chest. "Your Honor, I'm not a perfect man. I didn't grow up dreaming of fatherhood. I didn't meet Ella because of a charity campaign or some legal connection. She walked into my office, alone, with a crayon resume and more courage than I've seen in any boardroom. And since that day, she has changed my life." He paused. "I don't want custody because I feel guilty, or because I need to save her. I want it because she saved me, because she deserves someone who will stay, not someone who circles back when the paperwork reappears. I've shown up every week, every call, every time she whispered, 'Are you still here?' I answered, 'Yes, and I will keep saying yes.'" He sat down, heart pounding. The judge nodded, then turned to Callie. "Do you wish to speak?" Callie stood. Her voice was hoarse. "She's family. Blood counts. I wasn't ready before, but I am now. And no matter what you think of me, I'm the one who shares her name." Ella's grip on her notebook tightened. The judge looked at her. "Ella, would you like to speak?" Jason turned. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. She stood, walked to the center, and faced the bench. "My name is Ella Ray Moreau. I'm 11. And I know that most people think kids like me are too young to know what's best. But I know what safe feels like, and what unsafe feels like. And I know that Mr. Westin doesn't just say he'll be there. He is there, even when I mess up, even when I get quiet." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "Callie is my aunt, that's true, but she's not my home. And he is." The judge watched her closely. "Why?" "Because he sees me try," Ella said. "And he stays." There was no sound in the room after that, only silence. Heavy, full. The judge turned over the pages in the file, lips pursed. Then she spoke. "This court acknowledges the familial relationship between the petitioner and the child. However, based on the testimony, the psychological evaluations, the child's own words, and the documented history of care, I am granting full guardianship to Mr. Jason Westin." Jason closed his eyes. Ella exhaled. Callie said nothing. She simply gathered her coat and walked out before the paperwork was signed. Later, as they left the building, Jason looked down at Ella. "You were amazing. I was scared. And brave at the same time." "Do you think she hated me for saying it?" Jason paused. "I think she saw a girl who didn't flinch, and that probably scared her." Ella looked up at the clouds. "I want to go home now." "You already are." Jason didn't tell many people about the ruling. Not his board, not his oldest friend, not even his assistant, who, despite seeing the signs for months, politely kept her questions to herself. He didn't announce it, didn't post a quote about fatherhood, didn't host a celebration. Instead, he made waffles. They were slightly burned, slightly undercooked in the center, and he poured too much syrup on them because he didn't know when to stop. Ella ate them anyway. "That's the thing about trying," she said between bites. "You don't have to be great, just consistent." He laughed into his coffee. "Are you quoting yourself now?" "I'm quoting the badge," she said, pointing to the tiny unicorn pin now fastened proudly to her backpack strap. Their first official week as a family wasn't perfect. Jason accidentally double-booked a strategy call on a day Ella needed a ride to an art workshop. She got quiet when her favorite pajamas were accidentally tossed in a dry-cleaning pile and came back smelling like starch. They argued once about whether 12-year-olds needed phones, but made up quickly when Jason handed her a flip phone with giant buttons for emergencies only. They carved out routines: Taco Tuesdays, Movie Fridays, Sunday check-in walks, where they walked the same 6 blocks around the apartment just to talk, no agenda. Ella started drawing bigger things, murals on oversized paper, concepts that blended words and shapes, an entire series she called Staying Power, about people who didn't leave. One evening, while they folded laundry, she asked, "Have you ever been a kid before?" Jason smirked. "Briefly." "What were you like?" He hesitated. "Quiet, watchful, like you." "Did you have a mom?" "Yes." "And a dad?" Jason's hands slowed. "Yes." "Did they stay?" He paused for a long time, then said, "My mom stayed as long as she could. My dad, not really." Ella nodded like she understood more than he expected her to. "Is that why you don't like loud goodbyes?" He looked at her. "Maybe." "I don't like them either," she said. "They feel like doors slamming." That night he dug through an old storage box in the back of his closet, one filled with things he hadn't looked at in years. He found a photo of himself at 10, standing next to his mother, blurry, sunburnt, both of them squinting into the sun. He took it to the kitchen and left it on the counter. The next morning it was gone, replaced with a drawing. Ella had sketched the photo in graphite, soft, careful lines. But beside it she'd added a third figure, slightly taller, in a collared shirt and glasses. She had drawn him beside his mother and his younger self. "You should have had someone," she said quietly. He looked at the sketch for a long time. "I do now." Fall brought change. The days grew shorter. Ella outgrew another pair of sneakers. Jason found himself learning how to cook without burning things, slowly, awkwardly, but with purpose. They started making dinner together 3 nights a week. It was messy, loud, and filled with laughter that echoed through the apartment like music. Jason rearranged his office hours, installed a second desk beside his own with crayons, markers, and a corkboard labeled Ella's Corner of Genius. No one questioned it. Everyone adapted, especially him. At school, Ella bloomed. Her teachers called Jason to say she was turning in advanced writing pieces, leading group projects, drawing during lunch, but also listening, really listening, to kids who didn't know how to say what they felt. She didn't tell him any of this herself. She just kept showing up, doing the work, and tucking each success into her quiet, growing confidence. One Friday afternoon, they sat on the floor of the living room, organizing old paperwork, school documents, tax files, boxes of Jason's forgotten awards. Ella sifted through a stack of forms until she found a familiar one, her birth certificate. She stared at it for a long time. Jason looked up. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Then she turned the certificate toward him. "Why does it still say Moreau?" Jason hesitated. "That's your name." "But it's not who I live with." He didn't speak. Ella kept going. "I want to change it." He blinked. "You want my name?" She nodded. "Westin. Ella Ray Westin. It sounds right?" 1,000 thoughts rushed through his head. Legal steps, paperwork, consent forms, but none of it mattered. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." "Why now?" She looked at him, eyes calm but serious. "Because I've tried enough, and now I've stayed enough." His throat tightened. "Okay," he said softly. "We'll make it official." That weekend they went to the notary's office. Ella filled out her part in purple ink, careful and neat. When the woman behind the desk asked, "Why do you want to change your name?" Ella replied, "Because it matches where I belong." Afterward, they celebrated with milkshakes. Jason let her order extra whipped cream. They sat on a bench, the city moving around them, and she leaned against his arm. "You know this means you have to be my dad forever now," she teased. He wrapped an arm around her. "That was always the plan." Winter came early that year, the kind that stung your cheeks and fogged the windows in thick, breathy clouds. Jason noticed the change in the air the same way he noticed the change in Ella, slow, steady, almost imperceptible, until one day it was undeniable. She was taller now. Her voice was changing, deeper, wiser. She started journaling more, drawing less, retreating inward in the way teens do when they're searching for something but don't yet have the words. One Friday evening, he knocked on her bedroom door. "You okay?" She sat on her bed, hoodie pulled over her knees. "Yeah, just tired." He nodded, lingered for a second too long, then turned to leave. "Hey," she said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "If I mess up, like really mess up, will you still want me?" Jason didn't answer right away. He walked back into the room, sat on the floor beside her bed, and looked up. "I don't love you because you get things right," he said. "I love you because you keep showing up." Her eyes welled. "Even if I don't show up one day, then I'll come find you." She let out a quiet laugh, wiping her cheek with her sleeve. "That's very Dad of you." "Getting better at it." He stood, pulled her gently into a hug. She didn't resist. That winter she got sick. Nothing dramatic at first, just a cough, a fever, exhaustion. But within days it spiraled into something worse. She was admitted to the hospital with a lung infection that didn't respond to the first line of treatment. Jason didn't leave her side. He slept in the chair beside her bed, fielded calls from doctors and case managers, and pretended not to be terrified when they brought up secondary tests and longer stays. Ella, even in her haze, noticed. "Are you scared?" she asked one night, her voice hoarse, her hand cold in his. "Yes," he whispered. "But you're still here. Always." She recovered slowly, weeks instead of days. By the time she came home, spring was starting to thaw the city. The first night back, she stood in the middle of the apartment, staring at the wall where her crayon resume had been framed all this time. "I didn't really know what I was asking for back then," she said. Jason smiled. "Neither did I." "But you said yes anyway." "Yes," he said, "and I always will." She turned toward him, stronger now, clearer. "You think I can be someone people count on someday?" "You already are." They didn't say anything else that night, but a few days later, Jason found a new drawing pinned beside the crayon resume. This one done in ink, soft graphite, and blue watercolor. It was of a chair, and two figures in it, not one offering and the other deciding, but side by side, sitting together, home. Ella started high school the following fall. She chose an arts charter school on the east side, one with bright windows and teachers who didn't make students sit in alphabetical order. It was a long subway ride from their apartment, but she didn't mind. She said the time helped her think, helped her watch. Jason noticed how she walked differently now, shoulders back, headphones in, not quite daring the world, but no longer shrinking from it either. She'd found her voice, and it showed up in little ways. The way she challenged ideas, questioned rules, stood up when someone else got interrupted. It wasn't rebellion, it was clarity. For her final project in Intro to Design Thinking, she pitched something she called the first chair. Her concept was simple: a symbolic sculpture made from broken furniture shaped into a single large seat. Around the base, hundreds of tiny wooden plaques would carry phrases submitted anonymously by people who had once felt invisible. The idea was that when someone sat in the chair, they'd be surrounded by the words of those who had fought to be seen. "I want people to remember what it feels like," she told her teacher. "Not to be given power, but to be given a chance." Jason helped her gather the scraps. They drove out to warehouse dumpsters and furniture banks, laughing as they haggled with a grumpy clerk for a half-cracked mahogany leg and a drawer with no bottom. He watched as she sketched and measured and assembled, sanding, nailing, painting, late into the evenings with the studio windows open and music humming from her phone. When the piece was finally unveiled, it stood taller than he expected, proud, raw, beautiful in its imperfection. Jason stood at the edge of the gallery, sipping lukewarm punch from a paper cup, as student after student sat in the chair, fell silent, and emerged, changed, moved, teary-eyed. Not from spectacle, but from being met by words that echoed something they hadn't spoken aloud until that moment. He turned just as someone tapped his shoulder. The gallery's director stood there smiling. "She's special." Jason nodded. "Yeah, she is." "You the artist's father?" He hesitated, then said it out loud. "Yes, I am." Ella spotted him across the room and walked over, brushing sawdust from her jeans. "You stayed for the whole thing?" "Of course I did." She tucked her hair behind her ear. "Did you read any of the plaques?" "Everyone." Her voice softened. "Did you see the one I wrote?" He blinked. "Which one?" She pointed to a spot low on the left side near the base. He knelt to read it. It was small, written in her unmistakable hand. He saw me try, so I stayed. Jason stood slowly, eyes stinging. "You still keep the resume?" He smiled. "Framed and insured." They didn't say much more that night. They didn't need to, because the chair wasn't just her project, it was their story, and everyone could see it now. Ella's high school graduation fell on a humid afternoon in late June. The auditorium buzzed with proud parents, slouching siblings, and teachers in polyester gowns fanning themselves with programs. Jason sat 3 rows from the front, his tie slightly crooked, hands clasped too tightly in his lap. He wasn't nervous for the ceremony. He was nervous because Ella was giving the valedictory address and she hadn't let him read it. "I want it to be a surprise," she'd said, her smirk giving nothing away. When she stepped up to the podium, tassel swinging beside her cheek, Jason saw the same posture she'd carried into his office all those years ago, small frame, upright spine, and the quiet gravity of someone who knew who she was. "4 years ago," she began, "I walked into this school with a backpack full of pencils, a sketchbook full of questions, and a name that still felt like a jacket I hadn't grown into yet." The crowd chuckled gently. What I didn't say that day, but I'll say now, is that I had already done the bravest thing I'd ever do. I had walked into a stranger's office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower, handed him a piece of crayon-covered paper, and asked if someone, anyone, might see me try. Jason's breath caught. That man became my father, not through paperwork, not because we share a name, but because he stayed, through questions, through silence, through the kind of growing up that doesn't happen in straight lines. She paused, scanning the crowd. There are a lot of people who helped me get here, teachers, friends, social workers, but the first person who made me believe I belonged in a room like this was the man who didn't laugh when I handed him a unicorn resume. He just said, "Let's start today." She looked down for a second, then back up. "So, if you're walking into something new and you're scared, bring your drawing, bring your resume, bring whatever you have. Just start. And if someone gives you a seat, sit in it like you were meant to be there. Then pass that seat along." The room erupted in applause. Jason didn't stand. He couldn't. He just stayed seated, tears on his cheeks, hands pressed over his heart. Later, at home, Ella handed him a gift, small, wrapped in newsprint. He opened it to find a miniature replica of the first chair, sculpted in bronze, mounted on a wooden base. She pointed to a tiny engraving beneath it, "For the one who saw me try." "I wanted you to have it," she said, "before I go." He looked up. "Go?" "I got into the fellowship," she said. "The one with the public design lab in Chicago. It starts in August." He tried to smile. "You didn't tell me you applied." "I didn't want to say anything unless I made it. I wasn't sure if I was ready." "You are," he said, the words catching in his throat. "You always have been." She hugged him then, hard, fierce, familiar. "I'll visit," she whispered. "I'll call." "I know." "And someday," she pulled back, her smile soft, "I'll bring someone who's scared, someone who needs to try, and I'll tell them about a man who framed a crayon drawing like it was gold." Jason laughed, watery and full. "I'd like that." That night, after she fell asleep on the couch with her head on his shoulder, he looked at the little bronze chair beside the original drawing, both framed, both impossible to separate. He thought about the day she walked in, the day she asked him not for help, not for money, not for anything material, but for witness, and how giving it had changed the architecture of his life. He turned off the light and whispered into the dark, "Thank you for trying." 15 years later, the city had changed. The skyline had shifted, new glass towers replacing old ones, trees sprouting between rooftops where there used to be air vents and pigeons. But the building on 42nd Street still stood, casting its familiar shadow over the block like a memory too solid to fade. Ella stood outside it, her coat tugged around her shoulders, a soft fall breeze whispering through her curls. She looked up at the windows, at the revolving doors, at the polished brass plaque that still read Westin Foundation, though Jason had long since stepped away from day-to-day leadership. She hadn't been back here in years, not since the day she packed up her sketches, left a thank-you note on the desk, and headed west to build something of her own. But now she was back with someone else. The girl beside her was small, maybe 7, hair tied in 2 uneven braids. Her name was Kira. She held Ella's hand tightly, clutching a rolled piece of paper in her other fist, like it might disappear if she let go. "You nervous?" Ella asked. Kira nodded. "That's okay," Ella said. "So was I." They stepped through the doors. The lobby still gleamed. The receptionist offered a smile that was kind, but distant, until she saw Ella's name on the visitor log. "Oh," she said softly, "he's expecting you." Jason sat in the same office, a little older now, his beard a bit grayer, his shoulders a bit softer, but his eyes were the same, sharp, kind, deeply present. When Ella walked in, he stood and crossed the room in 3 strides, hugging her so tightly it took her breath. "Look at you," he whispered. "It's like seeing the future walk in again." She smiled and pulled back, then turned to Kira. "This," she said, "is the one I told you about." Kira stepped forward and held out her paper, drawn in marker this time. Bright, vivid colors, a girl in a field standing under a storm cloud, holding an umbrella made of books. Jason crouched to her level. "Hi, Kira," he said gently. "Is this for me?" She nodded. "It's my resume." He took it, unfolded it slowly. There were bullet points written in uneven but determined script. Good at helping, can read real fast, draws feelings, trying very hard. Jason looked up, throat tight. Kira whispered, "I just want someone to see me try." He swallowed the lump in his throat and smiled. "I see you." Kira's eyes brightened. She beamed. Jason stood and looked at Ella, who was already blinking back tears. "You remembered everything," he said. She walked to the window, looking out over the city. It started here. It had to come full circle. Kira explored the office while Jason and Ella sat and talked. About the school she'd opened, the stories she was helping kids tell, the book she was finally writing, not about her pain, but about her power. Before they left, Kira pulled on Jason's sleeve. "Can I come back next week?" He knelt again. "Of course you can." Ella knelt beside him and placed a hand on Kira's back. "Some people walk in looking for a job," she said gently, "but what you're really doing is building a home." Jason met Ella's eyes, full of memory, full of gratitude. "I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of us," she said. As they left, Jason turned back to his desk. The framed crayon resume still sat beneath the lamp, faded now, the edges curling slightly, but still there, still everything. He reached for it, brushed his fingers along the edge. Then he reached for the new one, Kira's, and placed it gently beside the first. 2 resumes, 2 stories, 1 legacy. Ella's studio was on the 5th floor of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Light-filled, a little too warm in the summer, and always cluttered in a way that felt intentional. Pencils in mason jars, canvases stacked like dominoes, old photos taped to the walls in constellations only she understood. This was her world now. She didn't call herself a therapist, but people often said visiting her felt like therapy. She worked with kids mostly, quiet ones, angry ones, ones who colored with the pressure of someone trying to erase something, not create it. She offered paper, chalk, pastels, silence, and when they were ready, conversation. She never pushed, just waited. She understood what it was to need space. One Tuesday afternoon, a girl named Maribel came in. She was 10, brown eyes, buzzed hair, a bruised kind of energy that made even stillness feel like motion. She didn't speak at first, just dropped her backpack and sat cross-legged on the floor, drew circles, then boxes. Then a shape that looked like a window cracked just slightly open. Ella didn't ask what it meant. Instead, She sat down beside her, cross-legged, and drew her own, an empty chair in the middle of a storm. Maribel looked over, eyebrows raised. "That yours?" Ella nodded. "It's sad." "Maybe," Ella said. "Or maybe it's waiting." The girl went back to drawing. They didn't speak again for 20 minutes, but when she left, Maribel tucked her drawing into her jacket. And before she stepped into the elevator, she looked back and said, "Can I come back next week?" Ella smiled. "Of course." After the door slid shut, she sat on the floor longer than usual, looked at the chair she'd drawn, realized it looked almost exactly like the one she'd first sat in years ago. That night she called Jason. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, kid." She smiled. "You still call me that. You'll always be. What's going on?" "I met someone today who reminded me of me, but younger, a little sharper around the edges." He paused. "Is that hard?" "No," she said. "It's kind of sacred." He didn't say anything for a moment, then, "I'm glad you're passing it on." She looked at her drawing again. "Do you think it ever stops mattering? Trying, I mean?" Jason laughed gently. "It's the only thing that keeps mattering more." They talked for a while, about her students, about Maribel, about how proud he was of her. Before they hung up, he said, "Frame that drawing." Why?" "Because I think you just started something again." The gallery was small, but the line stretched around the block. It wasn't because of fame. Ella wasn't a celebrity. There were no press interviews, no trending hashtags. But the people who knew, really knew, what her work did, they showed up. The exhibit was called Open Chair. Each piece told a story. Some were literal. Charcoal sketches of childhood beds, pencil drawings of folded resumes, watercolors of half-packed boxes on stoops. Others were abstract, swirling ink patterns that resolved into eyes only when viewed at an angle, a sculpture made of school desks with words carved beneath the seats, words like believe, almost, stay. At the center of the room stood the newest version of the first chair, taller now, textured with dozens of carved handprints from students who had sat in the real one at her studio over the years. No plaque, no spotlight, just a sign beside it, written in simple black marker. "Please sit. You're part of this." Jason was already there when she arrived. He stood in the corner, sipping tea like it was wine, wearing the same gray coat he'd worn to her high school graduation. He didn't say much, just gave her a long look that said, "You did it." She hugged him, then turned to greet the guests. Midway through the evening, someone approached the podium at the back of the gallery and tapped the mic. Ella had no idea there would be a speech. But the gallery owner winked at her, handed her a note card, and whispered, "You've got 5 minutes. Make them feel it." She stepped up, heart thudding. "I was 8 the first time I walked into a room where no one expected me," she began. "I had a paper covered in crayon and a sentence in my chest I was terrified to say out loud. But I said it anyway." She paused. "I asked someone if they could see me try, and they said yes." The room stilled. "I've been trying ever since, but not to prove myself, not to be good enough, just to stay true to that moment where trying meant hoping and staying meant choosing." She looked around. "This work is not about me. It's about the kids who walk in today, tomorrow, next year, the ones who don't have a title or permission or a safe place to land, the ones who carry their stories in drawings and say nothing until someone listens." She didn't cry, not then, but Jason did. So did Maribel, who sat in the third row, sketchbook on her lap, eyes wide and shining. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the chairs had been folded, Jason walked up and rested a hand on Ella's shoulder. "I meant what I said all those years ago," he told her. "That was the best resume I ever received." She turned, smiling softly. "I still have the pin." "I know." They stood in front of the chair together, quiet. And then Ella reached into her pocket and pulled out something new, a folded paper, a drawing. In crayon, she laid it on the seat of the chair and stepped back. "What is it?" Jason asked. She turned toward him. "It's a blank resume," she said, "for whoever needs it next." 10 years later, the city had changed again. Skylines stretched higher. Electric buses replaced the old rumbling ones. Smart glass reflected the sky in new shades. But somewhere on the east side, tucked between a community garden and a library with rainbow steps, stood the Ella Ray Center for Creative Belonging. It wasn't just a school, it was a studio, a shelter, a gallery, a classroom, a kitchen, a corner where kids could sit and not explain themselves. Ella had made it that way. Inside, the walls were filled with drawings, not perfect ones, but real ones, fragments of dreams, grief, humor, and bravery. In the main atrium, under a circular skylight, sat the first chair, now bronzed, solid, permanent. At its base was a plaque: "Try, stay, grow." Beneath that, smaller, in memory of Jason Westin. He never asked for this story to be about him, but without him, there would be no story. Ella stood at the back of the atrium, hands clasped loosely, watching a small group of new students file in. One boy, no older than 7, carried a shoebox under one arm and a sketch pad in the other. He looked unsure, anxious, like he'd practiced being invisible for too long. She crouched to his level. "Hi," she said. "I'm Ella." He nodded, didn't speak. "Do you want to sit in the chair?" He looked at it, then at her. "Do I need permission?" She smiled. "You just need your story." He walked over slowly, climbed in, tucked the sketch pad onto his lap, and looked up at the sunlight like it was a ceiling of stars. Ella felt her throat tighten. Jason would have loved him. He would have called him brave. And when the boy reached into his sketch pad and pulled out a folded piece of paper, crayons scrawled across the front, "My Tris," she knew what she had to do. She walked to her office and pulled out the wooden box from the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of resumes, all handmade, all ungraded, all cherished. She found a spot for his, right beside hers, the first one. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the center quieted, she stood alone in the atrium. She sat in the chair, tracing the names carved into the metal along the arms. Jason's, hers, Maribel's, others. And she whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for seeing me try." The wind stirred faintly through the vents above, and somewhere in that quiet, it answered back. The letter arrived 1 year after his passing. It had been sealed in a plain white envelope with her name on it, Ella, written in Jason's all-caps handwriting, tight and deliberate, like he always wrote when something mattered. His attorney delivered it in person. "He wrote it the month before," she said, "told me to wait, said you'd know when it was time." Ella sat alone in her apartment that evening, mug of chamomile tea steaming beside her, the world outside her windows quiet. She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, afraid the act might feel too final. The letter was handwritten, no computer printout, no polished phrases, just Jason. "Ella, you walked into my office a lifetime ago. You asked if someone could see you try. What I never told you, what I couldn't find the right moment to say, is that I'd stopped trying long before you walked in. I didn't know that then. I thought I was building something that mattered, that I had purpose. But the truth is, I was waiting. Waiting for something to pierce the silence I'd built around my life. And then you showed up. You didn't beg, you didn't plead. You just stood there with your unicorn resume and your hands full of hope and asked me to witness you. That moment was not your beginning, it was mine. Everything after that was a becoming. I became someone new in your presence, someone better. You didn't just give me a second chance, you gave me my first real one. I don't know where you'll go from here, but I hope you'll remember 2 things. First, trying is enough. It always was. Second, love is not made perfect by timing. It's made real by showing up. I showed up because you asked me to. I stayed because I never wanted to miss a single page of the story you were writing. Whatever happens next, I'm already proud of you. With all the quiet love I could never quite say aloud, Dad? Ella pressed the paper to her chest, closed her eyes, and wept. But they weren't bitter tears, they were full ones, like rain that nourishes, like a closing sentence to a chapter that had taught her how to write her own. Later that week, she returned to the foundation. She found the file marked Legacy Projects in the archives and opened a new folder. She titled it The Try Project. It was simple, a growing archive of stories, letters, drawings, submitted by kids who had taken their first steps. Some were scrawled in crayon, others typed on school library computers. A few arrived with no names, just bold statements like, "I'm still here," or "I helped someone eat lunch today." She printed each one, filed them, read them when the world felt too sharp, and as the archive grew, she started to see something she hadn't dared hope for. A community, a shared language of effort, an invisible thread woven from one child's bravery to the next. At the 10-year anniversary of the Ella Ray Center, she stood before a packed atrium of students, alumni, families, and new volunteers. She held the original unicorn resume in her hand, laminated now, preserved like a sacred text. She raised it high and said, "This is not where my story started. It's where my voice started, and every voice here matters." A girl in the front row stood and held up a sheet of paper, covered in sparkles, signed Anya. Then another hand rose, and another. By the end of the speech, the stage was covered in resumes. They weren't about skills, they were declarations. I try. I stayed, I believe. Jason would have wept. Ella did. But she also smiled, because what they built was no longer just memory. It was movement, and the world would never be the same. The visitor arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Ella had just wrapped up a staff meeting and was organizing feedback notes in her office when her receptionist buzzed in. "There's someone here who asked for you specifically. She says her name's Mara?" Ella froze. Mara, the caseworker from all those years ago, the one who stood beside Jason through the hearings, who believed in their bond before it was even legal. Ella hadn't seen her since her early teens, but the name alone unlocked a memory so warm and sharp it pulled tears to the corners of her eyes. "Send her in," Ella said. Mara entered slowly, her hair now streaked with silver, her eyes still as kind and clear as ever. "You're taller than I expected," Mara said with a soft laugh. "And you're exactly the same," Ella replied. They hugged. No fanfare, no speeches, just two people who had once stood at a turning point together. "I read about the center," Mara said, gesturing to the walls around them. "I always wondered if you'd build something like this. I always wondered if you'd come to see it." They sat for a while, catching up, on their lives, the things they'd both lost, the things they'd both chosen. Mara talked about the new policies she was working on to reform the placement process. Ella told her about the Try Project, the archives, the latest wave of resumes that had arrived from an elementary school in Newark. But before Mara left, she pulled something from her bag, an old notebook, worn, familiar. Ella recognized it instantly. Her notebook, the one she carried during her early visits to Jason's office, the one she'd thought she'd lost. "We found it during a department archive cleaning," Mara said. "It was misfiled under discontinued cases. I knew you'd want it." Ella ran her hands over the cover like it was sacred. Inside, her younger handwriting stared back at her, loopy, earnest, unsure. Pages filled with observations, drawings, questions like, "Why do people pretend they aren't afraid?" And in the back, something she didn't remember writing. A letter, unfinished, addressed to Jason. "Dear Mr. Westin, if I ever get to stay for real, I want you to know something. I don't want to be the best kid you've ever met. I don't want to be perfect or easy. I just want to know you'll still sit in your chair even when I mess up, that you won't disappear. Because I think if you stay long enough, I'll believe it. And if I believe it, maybe I'll become someone who can stay too." Ella blinked hard. She turned the page. There was a line added in Jason's handwriting, different ink, written later. "You already have." That night, Ella did something she hadn't done in years. She returned to the original building. Floor 42. The office still existed. It was no longer his. Jason had retired a few years before his passing, but the new tenants had kept part of the suite intact, as a tribute, as a story that had spread farther than either of them had realized. She walked to the corner where the desk used to be. She sat in the chair, and she whispered, "I stayed." Then she opened the notebook and finished the letter. "And now I help others stay too. Thanks for waiting for me. Love, Ella." She placed the notebook on the desk, stood, and walked out. Not because anything was over, but because everything he taught her was still living, still growing, still trying. The room was quiet, not because people had nothing to say, but because the weight of the moment was enough on its own. At the front of the hall stood a podium, flanked by 2 tall panels of soft white fabric embroidered with names, over 200, stitched in looping gold thread. Above the panels hung a simple phrase, "The Jason Westin Fellowship for Relational Leadership." Ella stood beside the podium, hands folded. She had rehearsed a dozen versions of this speech, all of them too polished, too safe. She'd scrapped them hours before and decided instead to speak from the same place she had always spoken from, the seat of trying. She stepped up to the mic, looked at the rows of students, donors, community partners, and, most importantly, the kids. "Most people don't start movements," she said. "Most people don't even know when they're starting their own story. They just show up, ask a question, take a risk, hand someone a drawing and say, 'See me.'" Some in the crowd nodded. Others wiped their eyes. "That's what I did," she continued. "At 8 years old, I didn't want to change the world. I just wanted to sit down, be seen, be safe, be allowed to try. And Jason, he gave me that chance." She gestured to the panels of names. "These are all the people who've come through the program since, who've stepped into rooms they didn't feel ready for, who asked questions others were afraid to ask, who sat in chairs built by others and then built new ones for someone else." Her voice faltered slightly. "And today we're launching something new, a fellowship designed not for the best resume, but for the best questions, for the ones who still believe in effort, in showing up, in people." She stepped back. The audience rose to their feet. When the applause died down, Ella returned to her seat beside a young girl, barely 9, hair in messy puffs, fingernails painted with glitter that had half flaked off. Her name was Jalen, and she was the first recipient of the new fellowship. Ella turned to her and said, "I want to give you something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black folder. Inside was the original resume. The one. The crayon lines had faded. The unicorn horn had curled slightly, but it was still intact, still perfect. Jalen opened it, eyes wide. "You made this?" Ella nodded. "I brought it to a man who changed my life." "Did he hire you?" "He didn't hire me," she said. "He believed in me." Jalen clutched the page like it was a sacred artifact. "Can I keep it?" Ella smiled. "No, but you can borrow it until you make your own." Jalen leaned her head on Ella's shoulder. "I'm scared," she whispered. Ella placed an arm around her. "Good. That means you're doing it right." They sat like that until the lights dimmed. Not heroes, not symbols, just 2 people holding a legacy made of nothing more and nothing less than presence, permission, and the power of one word repeated over a lifetime. Try. 15 years later, the envelope arrived. It was hand-addressed, stamped in bright orange ink, and tucked between grant applications and curriculum proposals on Ella's desk. She nearly missed it until she saw the return name in the corner. Jalen Moore. Her heart skipped. She opened it slowly, fingers trembling like they used to when she was a kid pulling papers from her own mailbox at the group home. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, written in pen. "Dear Ella, I found someone. Her name is Ayla. She's 9. loves constellations, refuses to wear matching socks, and carries a worn notebook like it's armor. She walked into my classroom yesterday with no introduction and said, "I think I need to tell someone something, but I don't know how." So I gave her paper and silence. And then she drew a chair, just a chair, nothing else. I knew what it meant. You gave me something when I couldn't see who I'd be. You handed me a resume made of crayon and belief and told me to borrow it until I made my own. I still have it. It's in a shadow box on my wall, but I think it's time I pass it along. To Ella, because she's trying, and she deserves to know someone sees it. So thank you for staying long enough for me to believe I could stay too, and for trusting that what you started with Jason wasn't a moment. It was a movement. I'll make sure she knows. Love always, Jalen. Ella read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, stood up, and walked down the long hallway of the center. At the far end, in a glass case surrounded by a soft halo of light, sat the archive, the rotating exhibit of every child's beginning, letters, drawings, first tries. She opened the case, placed Jalen's letter beside Jason's, 2 different hands, one unbroken thread. Outside the window, the afternoon sun caught the bronze plaque beneath the first chair, casting a soft golden shimmer. Ella stepped outside and found the newest mentee sitting on the bench near the front garden. Ayla, hair in a cloud of curls, socks mismatched, notebook in her lap. Ella sat beside her. "You know," she said, "that chair you drew, there's a real one inside." Ayla looked up, curious. "Would you like to see it?" She hesitated. "Is it for grown-ups?" "No," Ella said, her voice warm. "It's for anyone who needs it." Ayla nodded, closed her notebook, and stood. They walked inside together, and as Ayla sat in the first chair, feet dangling, fingers brushing the carved edges, Ella smiled. Because what Jason started hadn't ended with her. It had continued through crayon and paper, through silence and belief, through children who walked in with questions and stayed long enough to offer answers to someone else. Ella placed a new sign beside the chair that day. Just one word, again. Because trying doesn't end. It begins, again and again and again. The garden was quiet. Tucked behind the newest wing of the Ella Ray Center, it had once been nothing but concrete and weeds. Now it bloomed. Lavender, sage, soft grasses that whispered when the wind passed through. A circular bench wrapped around a tree planted the day Jason's first grant was awarded. Ella sat there now, older, slower, but smiling. It was her last official day at the center. Tomorrow her successor would take the reins. She'd spent the morning hugging staff, touring classrooms, and reading notes left on her door, thank you cards, hand-drawn portraits, poems about staying. But this moment, this one was hers alone. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. Not her old one. The archive version was preserved behind glass. This was new, fresh pages, blank. On the first page she began to write. "Dear me, you are 8. You are tired in a way most adults don't understand. You're walking into a tower with knees shaking and a drawing crumpled in your hand. You're not here to be rescued, you're here to try. And what you don't know yet, what you can't possibly imagine, is how this moment will grow, how it will stretch into decades, how it will ripple into lives you will never meet, how one man will look at your drawing and say yes, and how you, through heartbreak and healing and so much hope, will learn to say yes back. You will not become perfect. You will become whole. You will stay. And one day you will give this story to someone else who is just beginning theirs. So keep walking, Ella. Someone is waiting. And you are not alone. Not anymore. With love, the you who stayed." She closed the notebook and tucked it beneath the bench, her last gift to the space she'd built from memory and will and hope. A gentle breeze moved through the garden, and from within the center, laughter rang out. Children learning, stumbling, growing. Trying. Ella stood, took one last look at the chair visible through the window, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she walked down the path, into the sun, into peace, into whatever came next. As she reached the gate, Ella paused. One hand on the latch, one foot still inside the garden, she turned back for a moment. Not because she'd forgotten anything, but because she wanted to see it one more time. The chair through the glass, the tree bent slightly from wind, the bench with a notebook no one would find until they needed it. She imagined Jason standing there, arms crossed, that soft smile he never showed anyone else, and she imagined telling him not goodbye, but something simpler, something they had both believed in from the start. She whispered it to the air, to the wind, to the sunlight. "I'm still trying." Then she stepped out and kept going.